Welcome all to Access Games Otome panel. Sweet. Glad you can make it. It's the end of the con. Glad to see everybody's alive-ish. Yeah, sweet.
Air conditioning, because it's 95 degrees outside. Yay!
Yeah.
Oh, well, all right. And then you add
Is that the
and all that
humidity
stuff.
or the temperature?
It's more with the humidity.
Yeah, it's been
We're
pretty
from
brutal
dry
for us.
heat.
Yeah.
I thought I had broken the
so-
table, but I fixed it.
And by dry heat, we mean it's like 6 degrees and raining in LA
yeah.
right now. Anyway, enough of that. So you're probably here to hear about all things Otome, and hopefully we can answer some questions and fill you in on some of the processes. So I guess we will kick it off.
Cool.
So
If we want to show our
wonderful
cool
slides.
PowerPoint presentation,
PowerPoint-ish.
cornerstone of any engaging panel.
Yes. Fair enough.
You're watching double us because we're on the
Yes.
screen and
We come in 6-packs now. Makes it more convenient. Anyway, I guess maybe we'll just kick off with some introductions. So we'll start stage right.
Oh, God. Can we get our PowerPoint up on the thing? There it is. Okay. See? Oh, yeah. So that one's me. I'm the one on the right. I'm on the marketing team. I'm a marketing manager. I am the most recent of Access employees. The two people to my left are total veterans. I've been there for 9 months. So I'm the least important here, so I get to do the PowerPoint. But my favorite Otomes are Code Realize and 7 Scarlet, and I most recently worked on Little Dragons Cafe Deathmark and Code Realize Wintertide Miracles.
Oh, you're up.
oh, we're going out of order.
Well, that's not my fault.
We sat down and we didn't think about the order of the PowerPoint. That's okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen. I've been at Access for almost 10 years now and worked my way up from tester to proofreader to assistant editor and then to localization editor. And the first one, Otome, that I helped out on was Hakoki on PSP from forever ago. And I've probably had my hand on, in some form, about every Otome that's gone through, almost. I've at least looked at the text in some form. And yeah, my favorite ones, as it says up there, is Hakoki, and I have a soft spot for Sweet Fuse, which is one of the smaller ones that we got really early and usually gets forgotten because it's so small.
And shame that. Oh, yes, and I'm the one who got the victim of the creeper in office shop.
This is what happens when you don't send me a photo.
Fair enough. And I also want to, before I even introduce myself, I do want to point out that, like all things Access, things quickly devolve into chaos and insanity, so I apologize in advance. I've been kicking around at Access for 10 years and did 3 years at Xseed before that. Worked on a lot of titles, from PS2 titles up until the current generation stuff. My connection with Otome, I helped a little bit on Hakoki, and then mainly a lot of the marketing and website stuff for our more recent titles. And as it says up there, people keep hitting things.
That was not me.
Are you sure?
I'm so confident I was not moving.
There's ghosts up here. Yes. But Cholerax Malice and Bad Apple Wars are my two favorites for very different reasons. And for those who are new to Otome, I highly recommend Cholerax Malice as your entry point, because it has a really solid story and probably one of the biggest badass heroines in all of Otome. Done.
All right. Right. It's time.
Oddly enough, that's what we're here to talk about.
So we have a slide here to tell you guys what Otome is, which, I mean...
I hope you all know what this is.
Exactly. Like, if this is your level of knowledge, I'd be a little confused. I'm, like, grateful for your presence, but a little confused.
No, I actually want a few people who know nothing about it, because that way we get new people into the genre and it expands, and we can just dominate the marketplace.
Excellent.
At least I'm open in my crass capitalism.
All right. Who wants to explain what Otome is to a crowd of people who know what Otome is?
And by who wants to, we point at Karen.
Karen. Yay! Otome is visual novels geared towards the more romantic storylines. They are not necessarily straight date a guy storylines. They can be more focused on story with the dating on the side, but they are that specific genre of video game that is, they're not all really reverse harem, but they're kind of that way, I guess, because there's usually, you play as a girl and 5 to sometimes 7, 8, 10 guys. Depends on your game, really. I think like Nord 9's got, well, it's got 3 female protagonists, so that gets away from 9 guys. But yeah, they're all visual novels. They're all voiced. I don't think there's none that have been dubbed. I don't think. That's a lot of voices. So.
Yeah, another thing with Otome that it kind of misses a lot, just because a lot of times the focus is on the romantic aspects of the stories, is Otome covers an incredible amount of genres within just Otome. You have science fiction with Color X Malice is basically just 40s pulp, hardcore detective stories, just straight up horror, and then you have like weird mixes of everything. So
historical.
Yeah, like Hakuoki, which pretty much, Bishi samurais that are also, I don't want to say anything because I'm not sure if it's a plot.
They're all historical characters. They're just put into an Otome. Like Code Realize is historical / literature characters. So that's not really a trope, but a lot of times they like to pull characters that actually exist or have been created before, and they just come up with a new version of them.
Usually hotter.
Yes.
I don't know what you're talking about. Frankenstein had abs in the book. He did.
Dr.
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
Both the doctor and the monster had abs. This is key. All right. Do we all know what Otome is now? Raise your hand if you don't. Sick.
Cool.
So how did we get into Otome? You guys, you got to tell us.
Oh, you know more than me?
Oh, okay, I guess I have to talk now. Sorry about that.
All I know is Hakuoki was the first one that I know that we got into, but I don't remember how exactly we got to it.
Yeah, Hakuoki was our very first Otome title, and as you can see, it was a combination of the happenstance. Like, also, 999 had a lot to do with our entry into Otome. If you haven't played that game, I highly recommend it.
It's super fun.
Super fun and kind of on the gory side, so you've been warned.
And not Otome.
Definitely not Otome.
It can be if you put your mind to it.
I mean, everybody ships everybody in that game, so I guess yes.
Yeah, you can. I mean, in this episode of Stockholm Syndrome. But also the third title on there is one that many people may not remember from us, is Record of August Wars. This was the one that I think really got us into Otome. For those who don't remember, Record of August Wars is a strategy RPG where the idea is the main character, he has to marry a heroine because he's doomed to die, and his son takes over the quest to defeat the ultimate evil in the world. And
Like 3 generations?
It's 3 to 5 generations, depends on the game. They're good games, just a heads up that some of the stories are, like, depending on the path you take, can become interesting, and I'll leave it at that. But through that, just because we were so used to doing these, like, essentially sprawling visual novels, but August War just happened to have a solid, like, strategy RPG element to it. Idea Factory approached us like, oh, we have this game, or have these games in the genre, what do you think? And they presented a fair bit, but we'll get into a little bit later, but we actually sat down and played a little bit of Hakuoki, like amongst the office. And
I think I remember like when they were like these titles, and I went, I don't know very many Otomes, but Hakoki, that one I know.
yes,
That one is big enough that the U.S. has understood what that one is.
yeah, I guess. Because Karen, we do rely a lot on Karen's knowledge of the genre because she does a lot of heavy lifting and grunt work for kind of diving deeper into just the different games that we were looking at. But of the ones that we saw, Hakuoki was one that we all liked. We kind of liked the idea. I'm not sure how much I can say about the plot because I don't want to spoil people.
Well, how many of you do not know what Hakoki is? Okay.
Okay, there's enough people we won't.
Well, we can like at least say it was Japan with the Shinsengumi. So all of the guys are not really samurai; they're ronin sort of, and it's the Edo period. So they're all swords and stuff. And if you go by the historical accuracy of it, they all technically die. Spoiler.
Spoiler: they all die. And
Spoiler.
And also
but
notice-
in the game, they don't really die. It's a plot twist.
yeah, there's a plot twist. Also, they are far better looking in the game than they are in their historical counterparts.
If you look up Hijikata, you're like, okay, it's a Japanese samurai guy, cool. And then you look up him in Hakoki, and you're like, oh, okay, his hair goes down to here, and he's very tall, purple eyes. Nobody's got purple eyes. Purple eyes.
People do, but it's rare. But that's kind of how we got led into it, was a combination of being able to handle like games with a lot of text, with a lot of branching paths. And also we just saw, like with Hakuoki, it just seemed like a good game that was worth the risk of bringing it over. Because one thing I do like to point out is bringing Otome over, same with Line 99 in the Zero Escape series, was a risk because there was no real market for that type of game.
Yep.
999 maybe because of adventure games, but for Otome it was just, all right guys, here's this game, please buy it.
It was very much a Japan-only type of genre. It hadn't really come over to the U.S.
Yeah, but it wasn't something we were even really looked at or considered on our own, but it was something that just working with Idea Factory on other games, they're like, oh, you look like you guys can handle this. And when we looked through some of the titles they offered, they're like, wow, I think we can. So let's try it. And then now here we are today.
So, guys, how do we choose our games?
Well, you're involved in this part too.
Yes, but I'm asking you.
We spin a roulette wheel. No, okay.
Yeah, we just throw a dart at the wall and we're like, hey.
That one.
Like the basic answers, of course, is companies come to us or we see something and we reach out for it. With Otome, it gets a little bit more convoluted just because primarily there's one Otome publisher, and that's Otome Idea Factory. Also, when they give us games, we do play through them. And
Visual novels are long.
yeah, they're long, and normally when we get them, they're in Japanese only, so only a few of us in the office can play them. So I'll go through like the first couple hours.
Yeah, we can't get very far into the game, so it's usually in the office when we play them. It's a first impression type of thing. Do we like the characters? Do we like how they are portrayed, how the main character is portrayed, the setting?
Art,
whole bunch of
music,
stuff
anything we have to grasp onto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's when I go in and I do a bunch of research online to see how everybody reacts to the story, because I feel like that's a very important thing, especially in the United States. Japan's got so many visual novels. There's like sound novels now even, so there's like a whole bunch of different branches of visual novels, and they can get those out really easily, but in the US it's harder, and you have to have a good story to actually be able to draw the audience in and get people to recommend it to others. So I have to go online, I look for fans who have played it already in Japanese and have written summaries, because the fact that we can't get all the way through the game in our evaluations, it's important to know if there's some weird twist somewhere in the end that ESRB might be like, that's not, we can't bring that over to the United States. So, and there's several games,
Yeah.
a lot of games where you're like, oh, that ended really, really weird. Lots of like stuff you just don't want to read.
Yeah, there's a few things where we were really hyped on a game until we hit the point, as it were, and it's like, nope, this is not going to work. I mean, either the ESRB or the FBI are going to be knocking on a door asking for answers.
There's a lot of
Yeah,
there's
so
a lot of weird. It goes.
Yeah, do keep in
Off
mind
on
also with
tangents.
Otome, because it does go into the dark side quite a bit. You guys are probably familiar with other series that, while we might like them, there might be a market for them. It's at that point, it goes beyond just ESRB and the gaming industry at that point. So it's something we do have to tread lightly. So that also influences some of the games we decide to do.
We've published a lot, though, as you can see. It's a pretty hefty list. Most of them are available on our online store. I'm just letting you guys
Wink,
know
wink,
that.
nudge, nudge.
Warning, shilling alert.
I'm on the marketing team. What do you want?
Just trying to prep them for that. Also, there is one anomaly in that list, and that is Warriors of the Shinsengumi. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that title. That is not really an Otome game.
I mean, it is, but it's not.
Yes, it's kind of a digest version of the first story, wrapped around Dynasty Warriors.
Yeah.
It's basically a hack and slash. And it was for the PSP. It's a lot of fun, but yeah, it's one of those games where you're expecting romance, and it's like, all right, here's a sword. Now go hack and slay.
You can do both.
This one leaned harder on the other.
We contain multitudes. But here's how we make the games, which is a very good question. First thing we do, we organize the text. Karen, do you want to
He
explain what
turns
that
and looks
means?
at me. I mean, you've done this too. Organizing the text. It sounds easier. Man, I wish it was just like 3 words and I could summarize like that. Organize the text. Yay. Visual novels are really, really long games. And the way that I don't know how you characterize them, I guess, is we go by the number of Japanese characters that are in each game. So that's also one of the things that we take into consideration when we look at games, because the developers will be like, yes, this game has this many characters. And I think we've determined like the average length of a visual novel, especially Otome's, are like 1.5 million characters. And the way the Japanese is, one character could equal like 6 English words. So calculate that out yourself. And we all have to, every single word has to be localized into English. So we get giant, usually if the devs like us, we get a giant Excel file and thousands and thousands and thousands of rows of text. And so hopefully it's in one text file. Often it's not. Hopefully it's in chronological order. Often it's not.
No, Otomes are a little
Those
bit...
are a little bit better.
Yeah, Otome tends to be a slightly more logical in how the files are organized. Like, for example, regular RPGs or fighting games, things bounce around because there's different play levels you have to take in consideration, like gameplay versus story mode, where Otome is just wall of text, occasional branchings. So depending on the files, sometimes they can be very well organized by character or by chapter, in which case you do a little happy dance in the office, get mocked by your coworkers, and then you move on with life. Other times it's just a very long Excel file with no real context. So with us, it gets very important to make sure that we can try to find some way to connect things. And also, if you attended our previous panel, that's where having a glossary and kind of a concordance of terminology, and events becomes very, very, very important. especially in a game that is longer than like War and Peace.
Yeah, they're really long. The character organizations ones are usually the best because I know on the latest Code Realize one, they were like, these are the Victor stories, these are the Impy stories. And you're like, oh, cool, okay, I can keep the character voice and go through all of these, and it's just easier that way.
All right, so the next step is translation and editing. Karen.
Or both, because
I'll just talk the most here.
yeah. It's-
Sometimes some companies have one person that does both translation and editing at the same time. We go with a separate person that does translation and then another person that does editing, just to make it, it's kind of, I would call it sort of like a backup, really, because every translator translates differently. Every editor edits differently. And sometimes the translators will just write all the text and they won't worry about the context. And that's what the editor's job is. The editor has to make sure that all of the lines work together in a story, and the translator is just making sure that they have the lines accurate.
Yeah, translation is just almost a word dump. It's like, here's all the words they used in Japanese. Go.
And then hopefully they tell you, oh, this character talks with an accent, and you're like, okay, cool.
Or this character's male and this character's female. That confusion does jump up, but not so much in Otome, because it's usually just have one main female character, and they're.
Sometimes they have the males dress up as females in disguise.
Oh, that's
Sometimes
true.
the females are dressed up as males in disguise.
And you guys mentioned yesterday it's tough because Japanese doesn't really use pronouns, right?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
There's times in games where the Japanese text will literally consist of nothing but a single verb and like a grunt. And in Japanese, you can have a meaningful conversation like that. But all of a sudden in English, you have to start filling in like the subjects and the objects, because you can just say something like in Japanese, like "itaka," which is "Did you go?" "Hai, do?" "How was it?" "Ah, tanoshikata." "It was fun." But if you do a literal translation, it's like "went," "Yeah," "how," "great." Not really engaging text to read. So what editors have to do is go through it and start filling in. It's like, okay, where did they go?
Yeah, you have to
And
keep track of
yeah,
all of
where
that
did you
stuff.
go? It's like, what was good? It's like things of that nature. And that's where a good translator comes in, because they'll give you a little bit of context. Like, oh, by the way, they're talking about they either went to a great restaurant, they went to this store, whatever. But there are times I've, like personally, have edited a game where I had to go back and play the game and like write text as I was going through the scene, because there was no other like contextual clues. It was nothing but verbs and grunts.
Yeah,
was like-
that's a lot of, I mentioned this yesterday in our panel. Without context, we don't see the game when we work on it. It's all just straight text. So if the game does not describe something clearly, which Japanese does sometimes, you're like, okay, I looked at the shelf and there's a box on the shelf. And you're like, okay, cool, I will write that down. You play the game and you're like, oh, there are 6 shelves and it's not a box, it's like a tube. And you're like, okay, I wrote it, it's translated correctly, just contextually, it's not accurate. So there's a lot of rewriting and stuff like that.
Yeah, one other thing for Otome that becomes very kind of problematic is the fact a lot of times there's fan translations floating around, or fan synopses. And as an editor, especially like when you're working for a company, or for lack of a better way to put it, the professional level, you don't want to be accused of plagiarism. So one thing that at least I do, like on games I've worked on, not necessarily Otome, just in general, is if I know there's a translation out there, I will stay off the internet. I won't look at it. It's like, as far as I'm concerned, it does not exist. Because especially like for some Otome stuff, when we go back, like when we do read like synopsis of the stories and whatnot, and it becomes problematic for marketing side, when it's like, okay, I want to write out this really great outline describing the game for an ad or for like a website, and you realize someone else already did it. So you have to go back and like reword things, restructure sentences, try to come up with different talking points. So especially for a genre which has such passionate fans, like Otome, like the Otome Armada out there, if anybody's a member, it's something that we do have to keep in mind when we do the games, because we don't want to have someone come back and it's like, hey, that's my localization. And it's like, no, it's not. But also, there's only so many ways to translate certain things. But that's another
true.
thing that comes up with some games that do have like really passionate fan followings, and they kind of like, oh, this game's never coming over, so we're going to translate it ourselves. So if we know there's something like that out there, we'll just purposely like block it and never look at it and not acknowledge its existence. So that's all I have to say about that.
Cool. All right, the next step is announcing the game.
How would you do that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking, Mike. This is where marketing comes in. We have a big old meeting. We discuss basically our plan for how the game is going to be announced to the public, and it's a series of press releases. It's, all the nitty gritty, not so interesting behind the scenes. One thing is, a lot of the times we have to start planning how to market the game before we've had the chance to play the game, which can be tricky for obvious reasons.
That's when editors come in handy, because then marketing comes over and says, what's this game about?
Yeah, poor Karen. She'll get in the zone like Zuckerberg style and just like blinders, focusing on translation, editing, whatever. And I'll just come up to her like, oh, okay, but the Yakuza are good in this one? And she's like, yeah, I'm busy, but yes. And it's, I don't like to bother her, but I just want to give everyone the correct information.
Because they usually come to the editor, whoever works on the game, they will come to the editor for like the back of the box, any sort of details that have to go in the press release. It's because the editor is the one that knows the story the best out of the office. So anything that's like a summary has to be verified that it is correct through the editor.
And hopefully the editor is far enough into the game that they know what's going on. Because there's been times where, like, at the very beginning of a project, like, maybe the system text is translated. So it's like, what's this story about? It's like, I've just translated all the start and continue button text. Get back to me.
Yeah.
Or there's a visual that the marketing team wants to use, and they'll come to me and be like, can we use this? And I'll be like, that's an end of the game CG. You might not want to use that. It's kind of a spoiler. Oh, okay.
That comes up quite often, actually.
It is so hard to know which pair of people looking deeply into each other's eyes is a spoiler and which isn't. Okay. But yeah, no, this is the stage at which we come up with the merch. It's the stage at which we try to find good partnerships to like appeal to people, make our LEs more enticing, things of that nature. But yeah, that's it. That's my bit. And then I get to go to sleep. Anyway, the next stage is insert text / QA. Pretty key. Guys,
Yes.
tell us more about that.
This is very important because, again, as I said, we work with giant text files. We don't get the visual context. So QA is very important to be able to confirm or deny that we have the context correct. My favorite example, I mentioned this yesterday, is it Nor 9? Nor 9, I think. The fans came back to us, that QA apparently missed this, but the fans came back to us and they're like, okay, this scene, they're kissing, but the noises don't sound like kissing noises. And we're like, huh. I looked at the text, because another editor worked on this, and I looked at the text. Out of context, Japanese sound effects make no sense. So they like to combine kanji, and it's just kind of like, is this a grunt? Is this or you're like, I don't know what this means. What is this sound? And you don't get a visual, so you're like, I don't know. They're talking, and then the sound effect comes on, so you're like, is it like, oh, like, what is it? I don't understand. So the editor kind of was like, okay, maybe these are our grunt sounds. I don't know. So in the game, QA apparently missed this, but they're like, "Oh, I love you," and then it goes, "Ugh." And so obviously the fans were like, "This is wrong."
Wait, it is?
Yeah, don't.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Do you not go when you kiss somebody and go
I've been doing something wrong.
So I think luckily we were able to patch that one. It doesn't happen very often, be able to patch. I was like, please, can we patch this? Because this is really wrong.
I guess it depends on which way you go. Yeah, with QA, it's especially for visual novels and anything that's really text heavy, like they become our saviors, but they can't do everything. And also the average QA team is about anywhere from like 7 to 10 people max.
Yeah.
So, but when we sell a game and then thousands, tens of thousands of people look at it, you have all of these proofreaders be able to catch every little thing. So we'll end this section with whatever typo you guys have caught, we not already
We've
know
seen
about
it
it.
already.
We know about of a dozen or hundreds more that make us die inside every time we see them.
Because you only have a certain time period to be able to work on the text. As soon as it gets close to master and final submission, QA will work all the way up to that date to make sure the game doesn't crash and everything. But they will still give us text bugs, and we can't submit any more text to the developers because it's the final build. So they'll be like, hey, here, have 5 typos. Like, thank you. Wish you'd seen these like a month ago.
Yeah, so thanks,
Typos
guys.
still in the game. Yay.
Yeah. Another reason we don't mess with text too close to master submission, which I think is the next slide,
It should be.
is that nothing will bring a game down faster than misplaced text codes. For example, the aforementioned Agrest War way back at the beginning of the presentation, I made the mistake of using English-style double quotes in a text window. What I didn't know is the game uses those to mark text windows. So the game would read and go, okay, English quote, that's the start of a text window. Oh, in the middle of this window is another one. That means the text is done. I'm going to move on. So it would blue screen the game. So going through literally hundreds of thousands of characters to track down one double, like English style quote versus a Japanese style one. So you don't really want to be doing that like right before you're turning your game in to get published. So
There's a lot of code that you don't see in visual novels. Sometimes the developers are like, okay, we'll just make it easy and make it very obvious, but sometimes you'll have this bracket means this thing, this quotation mark means this thing, use a Japanese bracket for this thing, change the color code, change italics. There's a lot of
there's times where there'll be one word like hello in a window, but then there will be about a dozen like text formatting codes before and after it. So imagine really poorly written HTML. That's kind of what it looks like.
All right. Mike kind of spoiled this, but the next stage is master submission.
Yes, master submission. Yeah, once the game goes through the QA process, we turn it over to the first-party publishers, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, whoever. What they do is they don't really they do kind of their version of QA, but what they do is they have a checklist of things, not so much that the game works, but that it works in a very certain way. So your game might work, doesn't crash, but it doesn't meet their certain technical standards, they will reject it. And one thing where master submission becomes a very exciting experience is sometimes if they reject the game and you have to go back and fix it, sometimes it's very easy fix. Like, okay, we just have to swap A for B and we're done. Occasionally, you'll hear back from the developers going, oh, please, dear God, beg Sony to give us a pass because it's going to take 6 months of reprogramming to get this to work. So that's kind of where also patches come in. I know most people aren't a big fan of them, but a lot of times there's just a point where the game has to come out and you can, if you give it a little bit of extra time, you can fix it, but otherwise games just get delayed forever. That's why if you notice some games will get, the release date will get just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. Usually it's because either something happened in the dev cycle or something happening with master submission. Also, master submission usually takes place probably 2 months, a little bit more before the game releases. So that's also where leaks come from, is that it's like, oh, this game's coming out, but like some companies, they have a 6-month marketing cycle, so the game might have already just been done and sitting on a shelf, and they were just waiting for a time to release it. So that's kind of with master submission. So when people say, why didn't they catch this, this, and this, it's like, for the first parties, they were looking for very different things. Like, is button terminology correct? Are you using like capital letters, capitalization when appropriate, or lowercase when appropriate? Will the game cause people to go into seizures? Because they do have a test for that, especially in Nintendo. With the 3DS, they had like a spectroscope to make sure that your game wasn't like going to drive people insane or lobotomize them.
Yeah, honestly, the number of evals we've done where I've looked at the game and one of my points has been like, someone is going to be hospitalized from it is genuinely impressive. Yeah. Like, it comes up more than you would think. Yeah,
there's some games that really like the strobe effect, and a lot of, I know Nintendo especially kind of frowns upon that because they have a test for it. So for master submission, even with like the Otome games, which on the surface seem very simple, it doesn't take a whole lot to make them unstable if, let's say, if we dropped a period in the wrong place.
And we're lucky compared to games that are developed in the United States, because our games are usually done, except for the text. Text gets switched out, so we only really have to deal with usually text issues.
Yeah, very rarely do we have to do fresh games, but we have, like with Little Dragon's Cafe was one where there was a lot of finger crossing and finding religion and hoping that it would pass. I mean, I went God shopping for weeks to make sure that I found someone who would listen to my pleas.
I hope you checked the return policy.
I know Cthulhu's been good to me.
All right. And that's the process. That basically it boils it down to 5 steps. We've got about 20-something minutes left, so we have time for some Q&As. And just so you guys know, if you ask us a question, we've got cool character cards from Code Realize.
Yeah, this is from the original, like the first Code Realize LE. These things are very limited. We found a few in the office. So if you ask a question that's good, by all means.
All questions are good, Mike, except for ones that ask us specific details about upcoming games.
Yes, you cannot ask us about any
if you ask us about upcoming games, we will answer with a fun animal fact.
Or he will.
It might not be an accurate animal fact, but it will be fun.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
All right, we got some questions. Sweet.
All right, that is a line. I'm glad we saved up 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Sweet. All righty, let's kick this off.
All right.
We can kind of see you.
You've got the mic.
Hello.
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 Are you familiar with, and if so, what is your opinion on Hotiful Boyfriend?
Oh.
Hotiful boyfriends?
Hotiful
The
Boyfriend.
penguin game.
No,
It is not a penguin.
Pigeon?
Pigeon.
No,
Well, I said the penguin.
Hotiful boyfriend. I
Boyfriend.
played the original
He likes
all the way through.
I cosplayed as she
It
yesterday.
is the most, whoever did the localization on that, I want to buy them beer and then like build a shrine to them because it was amazing. I'm not sure if it was localized, if it was written originally in English, because I don't really know the origins of the game.
No, Haramoa, the creator, got one of her friends.
Yeah, but whoever did it, I really want to meet them because it was an amazing job. That thing was awesome. So that was a good question.
This makes me
Thank
think
you.
of the
Cool.
horse boyfriend game.
My
because
horse friend?
Oh my God, my horse Prince, I think you mean?
My horse prince, and then there's the my girlfriend's a llama,
Oh,
or is it alpaca? Or?
Listen, I liked the horse one because there was a skill level involved. You had to know how many carrots to give him to win the race.
everyone play Hotiful Boyfriend.
I don't know.
All right, cards for you. Thank you so much for your
That was
question.
a good one. But yes, but Hotiful Boyfriend is awesome. All right.
So out of the games you guys have localized, who is your favorite love interest and also your least favorite love interest?
Well, least is probably easy for you.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. When I first started playing Code Realize, like the very first time, right when I started at the company, I was getting a little testy with Lupin because his whole thing is just, he's just that archetype where they nag you right from the start. And I was just like, well, I'm not going with this guy. And so I like go through the whole like first 30 minutes of the game, finally get to a choice where Lupin's like, come with me or don't come with me. And I was like, you've been mean to me for this whole time, no way. And then, so I said no, and the game kicked me back to the main title. And so I learned my lesson, just always say yes.
Always say yes. Oh gosh, my favorite is Okita from Hakuoki. He is my favorite. There's a soft spot in my heart, and that's good because we've done like 5 Hakuoki games. So Okita is probably my favorite. Least favorite. Now I have to go through mentally in my head. Sweet Fuse had a creepy guy in it, and I was like, I don't know about you. And I'm trying to think. I can't think of any of their names right now. I've clearly been like, least favorite. You're not important enough for me to actually remember your name. So probably the dude in Code Realize, or not Code Realize, in Sweet Fuse. I think he dressed as the pig at some point, and I was like, nope, you're creep. We're gonna. I don't like the super creepy ones. They're not my favorites. If they're like, I love you, but I have to put you in a jail, then I'm like, no, I
I
don't
hate when
like
that
you.
happens.
Yeah, I love you so much, I'm gonna lock you in my closet. For me, least favorite is probably Impy.
Oh yeah,
Oh
no.
no, I
Realize
like
Impy.
Impy. I love Impy.
Yeah, but when will he learn to pull his sleeve up? It's so annoying. It's like, just fix it.
But he wants to go to the moon. Come on.
Don't we all?
But at least he can dress with some sense.
I mean, in Wintertide Miracles, they all got winter clothes.
That's true.
This is true, but his normal fashion attire leaves much to be desired.
He's a mechanic
That's no.
who wears orange, I guess.
Yes. Now that and his personality kind of grates. Lupin is a definite second. Favorite? None really off the top of my head. I like most of the interest in Bad Apple Wars just because I like
I
the
like
story.
the teachers in Bad Apple Wars.
Yeah,
Those are my
Buckethead's pretty
favorites.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Bucket, and also the rabbit, the principal. Like it's just for me, for the Otome stuff, I gravitate more towards the main heroine. That's why I like Collar X Malice so much because she's just like in control. It's like we are doing this. Like I don't think so, and she's like, "Yo, shut up. We're doing this anyway." And also the same with Bad Apple Wars, where it's just in control and just playing with the differences between good and right, as opposed to good and evil, was very interesting. But as far as guys that couldn't just be kicked to the corner, in the sad corner would probably be Empy.
I do like Victor, though.
Yeah, Victor's good.
He's a sweet little boy with perfect abs. All right. Thank you so much for your question. I hope we...
Hope we answered it. We don't want to throw these because these will probably
I
cause.
was like gonna frisbee it, but it seemed like a bad idea.
Yeah, she almost killed someone with the Jubei plushies yesterday.
That
so
is hilarious because I didn't even get one anywhere close to someone. I just got mocked by a whole room of people for my lack of sports skills.
Okay.
All right,
Hi,
who's next?
hi. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were about potentially working with other like Otome game companies like Chariots or Voltage in Japan.
Well,
This is
I think Voltage brings their own stuff
Yeah.
over mostly.
Yeah, as a rule, this is dangerously close to Yahoo territory, but we can answer in that it really depends on the relationships with publishers and what they want to do. Like Japanese developers, they have different things they're looking for. I mean, we're always open to new things. Like, it's good to have variety, but sometimes it's just not our decision. So, I mean, we keep an eye on things, but there's a lot of business stuff that gets involved that we can't talk about here because we'll all get fired. And why we
Just
like
right
you,
away.
we really like our jobs.
We do, but we do try. We listen to what people want. We do try.
Yeah, it's just that sometimes it is totally in the hands of like the Japanese developers and of whether they want to bring their games over or not. Because there have been times there's some devs, not necessarily in Otome, just in general, who have no interest in localizing their games outside of Japan. So,
All right. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes. thank you.
Excellent. Please come get your cards.
our lunch.
Hello.
Hi. Okay. So,
So sorry. Sorry, continue.
so I feel like for a lot of people who like Otome games, like girls are like, oh, I want to do translations. I want to get in the industry. So like, theoretically, you know Japanese. What is a company looking for on a resume if you want to become a translator, editor, and get your hands on them and bring them stateside? Are you looking JLPT? Are you looking for like a portfolio of translations? Like,
It really depends, because a lot of times places will divide translator and editor, because they're two different skill sets. Because I've done both, and the focus is dramatically different. Like when you're translating, speed and making sure that you are accurately just
Accurate.
getting the words out is the most important. Characterization doesn't matter, character limits do not matter, nothing. It's just raw, like brain dump. Where editing is taking that soup and then paring it down to something that reads well, that stays within the intentions of the original Japanese author. But in general, I say this at every panel, and I also preface it with my warning or disclaimer. I'm not being snarky. This is just the truth. Apply.
just apply.
Apply. If you're doing an editor position, make sure that your resume is on point. If there's any mistakes, you will.
That's not good.
Yeah, it's not good. But having some experience with the genre definitely helps. If you've done fan translations, like for example, one of our former translators and project managers, he was hired based on the subs he did for an anime series because he was a fan subber. And someone at the company saw it and went, wow, this guy's good. And it turned out he had his application or his resume floating around. So he got contacted and brought in. So having that experience and knowing how kind of the process works will definitely give you a leg up.
But
If
we
you-
also want to say that everybody's route to the position is different.
Yes.
So, like, I became an editor because I worked up through QA. I had good enough English, not really background. I have a film production degree, so I'm not an English major or anything. But I had a firm enough grasp on English, and I was able to be very detail oriented and focus on context and keep track of all that because it's very important to make sure that all of the lines connect to each other. And so I was able to work up through that. So sometimes you can jump straight in to be an editor, and sometimes you start at like proofread level and you go up.
Yeah, there's different paths. Like mine was weirder. I was looking for HR positions, and I just jumped into like Exceed, my previous company, and I was originally a translator and just helping with like the production and submission side. And they just needed someone who could edit a game, and I had time basically had time, and they're like, "Here you go, Mike." That's how I got my first game to edit. Was literally I had free time. So
Now you're doing girls dating sims.
yeah, so but if you're serious about it, just practice for the most part. If you're doing fan stuff, that's great. Just write, because especially doing games, you have to be very creative very quickly. And I would go back to Twitter and try to do 140 character tweets, because you're essentially writing books one tweet at a time.
Character limits are the worst.
Yes, they are
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
It was
that's-
helpful.
yes.
Please come get your card. I'm not going to try and throw it again.
These
It
are
was such a bad idea the first time.
almost put an eye out the last time.
Yeah, well.
All right.
Hello.
So, since Sony has killed the Vita and halted cartridge production, do you think you'll be continuing on the Vita with virtual-only releases, or will you be moving to the Switch or PS4? Or what console do I need to own now?
We cannot say. Mike, do you have an animal fact for us?
Let's see, do I have another fun animal fact?
Let's see. Did you know that when giraffes fight, they smack their necks together? They just smack them. It's crazy. Sometimes they die.
Wow, that was a cheery thought.
That was
Anyway, come get your
that went dark really fast.
Wow. Thanks for
We've
that,
got
guys.
10 minutes. Let's get through as many people
Yeah, we
as
got a
possible.
10-minute warning.
I love your outfit.
Yeah, the con people are waving around the sign frantically. It's like, guys.
Oh, really fast, before everyone, like I know we've got 10 minutes left. Just so you know, we do stream twitch.com/Axis Games, and the first Tuesday of every month is O Tuesday. So we always stream an Otome game. We've been working our way through Code Realize. If you guys ever want to, it's me, and I'm the one doing that. So.
Well, you sound so ashamed.
I'm not.
No, right now we're following the adventures of Cardio.
Yeah. I thought it would be funny to name her that, and I was right.
Yes, because the previous game was Cardiac, and then we had
Cardi B.
Cardi B. Oh, we had a Cardiac.
Yeah, we had a cardiac. Okay,
Yeah.
anyway. Next question.
Hi. So Japanese humor can be interesting,
Yes.
and it doesn't translate well a lot of the time. I was wondering if you could share a lost in translation moment.
Oh, dear Cthulhu and Relay, that can take an entire panel in itself. One I did talk about a little bit last, our other panel, where they didn't bother identifying a character with pronouns or any type of, and all the Japanese was neutral polite. So, and it was a fair amount of text. So I made the character the most badass woman I could think of. She just goes into a room and just annihilates everything. And when I finally got to see the character art and see the game, I'm like, wow, he's really cool. And then the bonus thing was just, all those lines had to be voiced, so I had to fix them all very quickly. There's other games where if they're very pun heavy, those become very difficult because
Yes.
Japanese puns are almost impossible to translate.
They're so bad.
So what we
They
normally
like to do lots of like word puns that
Yes.
only make sense in Japanese, and you're like, bolt and fish don't sound anything alike.
Yeah, you had that whole section in Deathmark where it was like all based on Japanese wordplay, and you had to
Yeah.
somehow make that work in
like,
English. And she
I.
did.
They're
She's
like,
amazing.
I love, I. And I'm like, those don't spell the same way in English. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, also, there's a lot of puns and things of that nature where normally at that point you just try to put an equivalent English word in, or English joke in.
They like to add the weird ticks at the end of sentences, like nya or
Yeah. Yeah, I think-
anything else related. Usually cat girls, you're like, okay, cat girl.
Yeah.
How do I write this cat girl so I don't have to write meow at the end of every single line?
So things like that, we tend to try to write around, especially honorifics. Normally we drop them, and just in context, you can show who's above someone else, who's at an equal level. Because in English, you don't call people san, senpai, kohai, and things like that.
Or big brother.
Or big brother, yeah.
But maybe
That
we should
comes up
start.
all
Be
the
the change you
time.
want to see in the world, Mike.
No, we killed them for a reason. So hopefully that answers your question. Or
Yeah, thank you.
Please have some
Come,
cards.
Have a card.
Hello.
Greetings.
Hi. I knew very little about Otome before I came here, but thank you for the great explanation.
Oh,
Cool.
Oh, good.
I wanted to know if you had published any Otome horror games.
Ultimate horror games? Caller
If you
X,
play Deathmark, right?
not really Ultimate. Caller X Malice will come close because basic premise is the main character, she wakes up with an explosive collar around her neck. And then it's just kind of like her doing a lot of hardcore detective work to find out who did it and why. And if you don't succeed in certain branching paths, it gets gory.
yeah.
So, but they're not particularly horror based.
Yeah, just like thrillery.
I
Yeah,
mean,
more thriller.
Sweet Fuse has an amusement park that gets taken over by a terrorist, and I think you can die in that one too.
Yeah, so it's existential horror, but not like pure-
Hakuoki is rated M, so that has a lot of blood and sword fighting and
It has some horror elements.
horror elements in that
Yeah.
too. There's
Yep.
there's not very much that's like hardcore horror because they're still trying to get the romance in there, but there's usually darker themes in a lot of the games.
Yeah, but if you want a horror game, not really Otome, and 5-minute warning, we'll shill Deathmark. It's a visual novel that came out, and that one is like a pure Japanese horror game.
It's really fun.
So if you like The Ring and Spiral and things of like the more creepy, constant dread horror, that'd be a good game to pick
But yeah,
up.
that's
And that's
definitely more
still
visual novel and
visual
not
novel.
Otome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not only.
All right.
Regardless, please have some cards.
As regards, if you wish.
Regardless,
Oh no, don't get him started. Don't
Oh, can I start?
no.
I'm sorry I started that. All right, next question.
Because we have like 4 minutes left, so we have to.
So I know you talked about this a little bit during your panel yesterday, but I'm curious about how you keep especially with the game, for example, like Hakuoki, that's so deep in Japanese, history, how you keep the nuances of the culture and that tone while still keeping it accessible to a North American audience.
That
It's a
boils down.
balance.
It's a balance and a lot of research. The idea.
Hakuoki had a lot of research.
Yeah, because once you know the historical aspects, it's easy to write, kind of like include some of the things that are necessary, like the political intrigue, and things of that nature. It isn't normally spelt out. Another thing with Japanese that a lot of people don't realize is like the text itself is fairly straightforward and dry. They'll add things like, for example, at the end of sentences, like the nyas, or if you're familiar with Japanese, there's osakaben, which is it shows kind of a level of education, like kind of like someone's from the hinterlands. So they'll use forms to do things like that, but the Japanese itself, the content's fairly straightforward. So it makes it kind of easy. It's like, okay, this is what they're trying to get across. Then it's just a matter of fitting it to character limits and also making sure that it reads well. So it's difficult, but at least for Access, we can't speak for other companies, we make it a point that if it's in the Japanese, we will somehow make sure it gets out in the localizations that we do.
Okay. I hope that answered your question. Come get cards.
If you want cards. And
Cards.
Yeah, we have a 2-minute warning. So if anybody has any other questions like afterwards,
Yeah,
we'll
you
keep
can come
going,
up
of
to
course,
us. We'll
but
be here.
afterwards we'll answer them like off to the side if you still want to have an answer. So, all right. Hello?
Since there was the aforementioned Vita apocalypse, I'm very hesitant to buy any games on the Vita. Are any of your games currently available, like on Steam or on PC elsewhere?
For some of our releases, Idea Factory did release them on Steam and on PC, so they'll be available there, but we didn't have a hand in those releases. But I know some of them are available. I just can't think of which.
At Hakuoki, I think it's on Steam
I think
through Idea Factory.
Yeah, I think Psychedelica might have come out recently, but yeah.
Yeah, that was last summer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not, but we don't really handle the PC releases of the Otome titles. That would be an Idea Factory question.
All right. Speeding through. Let's go.
Probably last one.
Probably the last question.
Yes.
Can I
Oh, we can hear you. You're good.
what is the most heartwarming and fuzzy feeling and ending route you have ever done?
Oh, Jesus.
And if that's too long of a question to answer, I would like you to answer my friend's question.
Oh, gosh.
That might.
Like my best.
That might be a
my
little tough to
best route.
summarize quickly.
We'll probably
heartwarming
have to move on because that one we have to think of which
that
one.
one is
Ask us
that one
after.
is
It gives us
thinking
time to
about
come up
that
with an
one.
answer.
I would like to know, what character has broken your heart the most throughout your
Okita. Right there. Tuberculosis. No. Probably that one. I'm trying to think any other ones in particular that have broken my heart. Hakuoki, that one just in general is very much like, why? Code Realize usually ends pretty happy.
Those are all.
I'm trying to think of anything that was really sad. Ashen Hawk, Psychedelica of Ashen Hawk had some really sad endings for some of the guys. There's a lot more bad ends for those guys than there were good ends. I think there's like one good route, and all the other ones like, nope, I died, or nope, I got shot, or I lost my memory, and you're like, that's sad.
Yeah, unfortunately, on that note, we'll have to end it because we are.
Sad note.
Yeah, on the sad
5
note.
o'clock.
See how we segged away?
Come
Thanks
get
for the
your
question.
cards.
But we'd like to thank everybody for coming to the panel. Hope you enjoyed the con. Keep an eye on our social media stuff for announcements, updates, and things of that nature.
Yep, we're on
And-
Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch,
And
so
if-
many places.
Yes, and if you have any questions, we'll hang out in the corner here for a little bit if you want to ask anything. And we also have a few more cards to give away, so if you want some, like, come
Come
now
ask a
for-
question.
Yeah, come ask a question or ask nicely. So thanks again, and thanks again
All
for
right.
MomoCon for having us here.
Yes,
We're going
thank
to
you.
clear off the
guys.
stage and then yes.